Hello, everybody. This is LC Holt, and this is my update for the week of July the 29th. Last week of July, I want to thank you all for sending me all the nice birthday messages. It was a good one. Today, we're going to be talking about the Nightmare on Elm Street series and the difference they made, especially in the 80s, culturally and otherwise. And we're going to go through each of the films. And I'm going to go through the films today with two very good guests of mine. You all know Rebecca Ivy. She's been on the show many times. But you haven't seen this guy around the show for a minute. We've done a couple shows together. Jay Burleson, director extraordinaire. How you doing, buddy?
I'm hanging in there, man.
Cool.
Been having the nightmares leading up to this. So I don't know what it all means, but we can talk about it.
We're going to talk about Mr. Freddy Krueger, created by a guy named Wes Craven. You ever heard of him? Yeah. Wes Craven has done some interesting movies, and he's done some movies that make you raise an eyebrow. I mean, not all of Wes's movies were fantastically wonderful. I mean, I'm thinking of things like Chiller and Deadly Friend, but he made some really awesome films. And unlike a lot of horror film directors, he was able to stay contemporary throughout his career, which is a tough thing to do. Some people just kind of get stuck in one thing. Wes was never afraid of trying new things. He created a couple very well-known franchises, Scream, later in his career. But the first one, really, was 1984's Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, he came up with Freddy Krueger based around some articles he read in an LA newspaper about young Asian men who had moved to America and were having these strange sleep-related deaths, sudden deaths. One in particular was a young guy who was, come to find out, hiding coffee pots around his room, and his parents would give him sleeping pills and he'd hide them, and he just wouldn't go to sleep. And one night he finally fell asleep and they carried him to his room, and suddenly at the middle of the night he starts screaming, and they run in there and he's thrashing in his sleep, and then by the time they get to him he falls silent and he's dead, died in his sleep, apparently from fear. So Wes Craven, being the horror master he is, read this and thought, there's a story there. And what was this story? This story eventually evolved into New Line Cinema's first big hit. New Line Cinema was run by a producer named Bob Shea, who started the company as a distribution company for prisons and colleges. And he would take these films around in the trunk of his car and try and get them shown. Reefer Madness was one that he got his hands on. There were a couple others. They started producing movies, and out of everyone in Hollywood, Bob Shea was the only guy who saw the potential in Wes Craven's script for A Nightmare on Elm Street. A lot of folks said, well, it's not going to be scary because the audience are going to know this is just a dream. You know, what's scary about a dream? But Wes was ahead of his time. Now, Jay, did you ever hear about how Wes came up with Freddy Krueger, the name and the image?
Yes, I recall that story vaguely, that it was, he was a kid, I believe, right? And he looked out his window at night and there was, I believe, a homeless man out there. That's the gist of it. I don't remember the specific details, but it left quite an impression on a young Wes Craven.
Yeah, that's what he went. He said he heard somebody out there. He woke up, looked out, and there's this dude. And the guy looks at Wes Craven as a little boy. And Wes Craven ducks down in the window, you know, and he's like, God, I hope he's gone away. And he looks up again. The guy's still there, and he's staring at him.
Right. Just like messing with him. Totally, yeah.
And he said later, Wes said that was part of his model for Freddy Krueger, was just the guy who got a kick out of scaring that kid, you know. And
right.
But the name Freddy Krueger came from a classmate of Wes Craven's. When he was a little boy, he had a paper route, and this other kid had a paper route, and the kid's name was Freddy. And he said every time at the end of the paper route, this Freddy kid would beat the shit out of Wes Craven. So Wes,
I hadn't heard that before.
Wes said he grew up, you know, with just this image in his mind of like Freddy. Like it was just one of those names that struck him as being bad, you know.
Right.
this kid that used to beat the shit out of him, and so Freddy was a bad name for him. So naturally, you throw that onto the image of this child killer who initially was, a child molester. Now I don't know about you, Jay, but I always just assumed that Freddy was a child molester.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I remember it too. And I know when they get into the remake, they, specifically say he's a child molester in that film, which I don't really recall at that time thinking anything about that, because I just always kind of assumed, like you said, that if he's killing these kids and just the whole boiler room and the way Freddy's personality is, it was sort of, it's right there on the surface.
Yeah, and and in the script, his original script, it was made clear that he molested the children. But I think there was a famous case, the McMartin case, about school teachers molesting children that was going on around '83 or so.
Yeah,
and the producers were like, could we just take the molesting part out? He can be a killer, he just can't molest them.
Right. Which that is interesting how things that are going on in real life dictate certain elements of stories. In certain movies, they don't want to release them because of what's going on in the culture and things like that. This is fascinating in general.
It's very true.
Yeah. David Warner was originally cast as Freddy Krueger, and you may know him from Time After Time, and he was also in Titanic.
That's right. He was Lovejoy in Titanic.
Yeah.
A British actor.
Yes.
It's really...
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Well, it's crazy to imagine anyone else in the role, since it's become such a cultural phenomenon.
Well, lucky for Robert Englund, David Warner had a scheduling conflict, so that's why he wasn't able to do the film.
Otherwise, David Warner would have been Freddy. I've seen some pictures of the makeup tests with David Warner's face. It looks similar, but it's interesting to just see another image of Freddy. But as you said, Robert got that part. Yeah, but I'm like you, Jay. I can't imagine another person other than Robert playing Freddy. I mean, he's just so indelible. The way he stands, the way he walks, all the little gestures and mannerisms, which we'll talk about later. They tried to not bring him back for one of the movies, and then they realized it wasn't such a good idea.
Oh, yeah. Pretty early on, too, that they had that thought.
I think originally they thought maybe, well, this could be like Jason, just stick another guy in the mask, and then they realized, like Freddy is not.
Were they just being cheap?
Probably cheap, too.
I think it had a lot to do with that, too. I think it was the second film that they basically were just going to get somebody to play that part because they didn't want to pay Robert Englund what he wanted, and they did like 2 weeks of filming without him, and then Bob Shea, I believe, was like, oh no, we gotta rectify this situation. They brought him back in, but I guess when we get to that film we can discuss it, but it makes sense too, because he's only really on screen for a very small amount of the second film.
That's true. Another benchmark of the first film was Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp's very first film role before 21 Jump Street. And well, I mean, what can you say about that? It's Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. I remember we watched there was an episode of Actors Studio. I remember they asked him about it, but you kind of had the impression they were kind of like, oh, you did this film, But he was quite proud of doing it. Yeah. And I think I'd heard that he'd even told Wes Craven, why didn't you ask me to come back, Oh,
with New Nightmare.
New Nightmare.
That's true.
And he was like, well, I didn't think you would have done it.
Yeah, he just thought, well, you're a big star now. You're not going to do New Nightmare. But come to find out, Johnny Depp said later that, I would have done it if you just called me,
Yeah, that would have been fascinating.
So what goes to show is, never just assume.
No.
Right.
Yeah. Also, what's interesting is the makeup effects. David Miller, who was fresh off of the Thriller music video, was the one that designed Freddy's face.
In that first movie,
in the first film.
Which is interesting because unlike the other ones, the first movie has some depth to it. Because I think he did like a layer and then a layer of burnt skin on top so that you could actually see, like there was a depth difference between the meat beneath and and the scarred skin, which they didn't do
Right.
later. It just kind of became like one piece later.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can really see that so much in the movie because Freddy is really dark in the first one.
Right. He definitely looks significantly different in a lot of the second one, like his face.
Yeah, and I think they use contacts in part two, whereas in the first one and in all the other ones, they used his Robert's blue eyes. I mean, there are a couple deaths we could talk about that are really well known. I mean, the one that pops to my mind is Tina's death, where she's dragged up the wall, and I mean, that's a pretty brutal way to start your movie.
Yes, it definitely sets the tone, and it's still super iconic. I watched that last night, and it's still just so impactful. It's a really, really great scene.
They got a lot of use out of that revolving room. They built a revolving room.
Yes.
Yeah. They made it Tina's room, and then they made it Johnny Depp, Glenn's room too, and they used it with both their deaths. They're like, well, if we're going to spend money, I'm sure I can hear Bob Shea saying, like, if we're going to spend money, let's use it twice.
Right. Totally. It makes sense.
Now the thing go ahead.
Use it. Let's find another way to use it.
Yeah, and the thing that I really the story I always love is when they were talking about how when they were filming Glenn's death, he gets pulled down into the bed and this geyser of blood shoots up, which is a brilliant idea, really dreamy and surreal. And but when they were shooting that, Wes Craven and Jock Hatkins, who was the DP, they were up in the corner, which would have been it was the floor, but it would have been the roof because it's turned upside down. And so they're filming down at this geyser of blood coming out. And when they dumped the blood, I guess the room wasn't built to hold that much colored water, because I think that's what they used was like darkly red colored water. And it broke the suspension of the revolving room, which then just began to spin like a roller coaster with Wes Craven and the DP stuck in it. Because the weight of the water pulled it, which in the movie, if you watch, there's that one little quick shot at the end where you see the blood on the ceiling, and then it's all starting to move to one side. And that's a piece of footage from when the thing started to spin, which is really a cool shot when you see it. Because again, it's dreamy and weird. Like, why is the blood moving to that side? Well, the blood's moving to that side because they broke the revolving room and it started to spin.
Well, looking at behind the scenes footage of the revolving room and how they did that, it just looks like kind of terrifying, and that you wouldn't want to be. I wouldn't want to be in that thing necessarily. But speaking of that death with the bed, part 4 has a really great carryover from that with the water bed, which is a pretty nice setup. That's
true. Well, as we're moving on through the series, we'll talk about part 2 here in a second, but I wanted to mention the ending of the original Nightmare was a bone of contention between Bob Shea and Wes Craven. Bob Shea wanted to have a hook because, he was thinking franchise, possibly.
Right, and he was right. The house that Freddy built.
That's right. And Wes Craven was sitting there going like, what are you talking about, a sequel? He wasn't even that was nowhere in his mind, apparently, that this could be a franchise. So he just wanted to end it. So they came up with that compromise, which was having crazy Ronnie Blakely pulled through the window of the door, which is probably one of the.
That film is really remarkable.
Locked. It's like she's in a whole other movie.
The first one's got just such a weird vibe to it, man. I hadn't seen it in years, really any of these films in years, and watching it again last night was kind of like seeing it for the first time in a way. It's got some interesting stuff going on in it, for sure.
There's a part of me that does wish, and tell me if you think the same way, Jay, or not, that they had used Wes Craven's compromise where it was just like Freddy was driving the car and it drove away and we didn't see Ronnie get pulled through the window. Because I don't know, the being pulled through the window looks terrible.
It does look really silly. Yeah.
It looks like one of those pool inflatable blow-up things.
That's
it's like an inflatable sex toy.
That's what it is. Yeah. It's like in a moment's notice, she turns into an inflatable sex toy and is pulled through the window.
But hey, I guess it worked.
Really interesting, yeah.
Sets up nicely for part 2.
It does set up nicely for part 2. If you have Ronnie Blakely's inflatable face with a little hole in the mouth, a little rounded hole, that would kind of run us into to the next film, which came pretty close on the hill, so close on the heels that Wes Craven was like, "Do another one? Hell no, I'm not," because they wanted to go. They wanted to go right away with Freddy's Revenge, which they did without Wes. They had a guy named David Chaskin write it, and Jack Shoulder, who had directed an earlier film for New Line, was a creative team on what has since been called the first gay horror film. Mark Patton starred in it. Mark's a nice guy. He has a very interesting story. He has a documentary coming out soon called Scream Queen. Scream,
and you know
Queen.
You know that's playing at Sidewalk Film Festival in Birmingham next month.
Is that right? I didn't know that. No. I wonder, is Mark going to be there?
Yep. I don't know about that. I hope he's there. I would love for him to be there. And it's playing Wednesday. So the festival's like a week long. It really kicks off on the weekend, but it's playing Wednesday. It's the last week of August.
So if any of you watching in the Alabama area want to head up to the Sidewalk Film Festival in Birmingham next weekend, you can go watch Scream Queen. Because like I said, it's Scream.
Yeah, next the end of August. I'm definitely gonna go see it.
End of August.
I would love Mark Patton was there. Would love if Kim Myers was attending as well, but I don't know about that.
Kim Myers, Meryl Streep, who's not Meryl Streep. She looks just like Meryl Streep in that movie. Every time I watch it, I'm like, Meryl Streep's in Nightmare? No. But
it's weird because watching it last night, again, hadn't seen it in years. I've seen the first one numerous times, but the second one only a handful of times. She kind of has like certain resemblance to my ex-girlfriend, which was really weird. I couldn't stop thinking about it. But I have to say, a hot take here, I think the second film is fucking fantastic. I actually enjoyed watching it more last night than I enjoyed watching the original.
Really? Because there's a lot of division about that second film. Some people are like, it's not like the other ones. And then other people are like, yeah, it's awesome. So you kind of fall in the it's awesome category. Yeah,
I think it's pretty great. I think it holds up well. I mean, there's some things about it that aren't great, but I don't know, man. It kind of plays more like a haunted house movie than it does a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, with all the things that are just not really taking place in dreams, but like all the stuff that's constantly, the house is hot, and the crazy bird scene where the bird gets out of the cage, and the toaster that catches fire. And I just love so many of the performances. I think Kim Myers is really good. I think Mark Patton's great in it. Really, it's pretty damn good.
And we can't forget about one of the greatest comedic performances I've seen ever, and Clu Gulager as the father.
He's fantastic. He's so good. I love characters like that, and it's like you're not quite sure how much is supposed to be on purpose with him and the coach, but the coach is great too. Like there's so many funny moments where they're like shit talking the coach, and he's right behind him that I think are really good.
Yeah, Marshall Bell did a lot of work. The guy who played the coach did a lot of work in the 80s, playing that kind of heavy, crazy guy in a number of movies. And Clu Gulager, like I said, has some of my favorite lines in the movie. I mean, he's a good goddamn kick in the ass. What he needs. Methadone clinic. Yeah. Damn bird.
Yeah.
One of the greatest off-screen lines ever. Damn bird.
I feel like in some way the second one feels like more of a direct extension of the first one than the third one does. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's just, it capitalizes more on those like Hollywood, LA locations that are used in the first one. I don't know. Definitely I've underrated it. I'm not saying it's a masterpiece, but I've always just kind of gone with like the consensus, I guess, of people that are like, oh, the second one's not great, the third one's really good, and the first one's really good. But having watched it again last night, I think it's definitely earned some more, rewatches in the future for me. There's a lot of really good things that it does. Like the scene where Freddy's like coming out of him in that bedroom at his friend's house is one of the best scenes in the series. I think it's fucking awesome.
Well, David Chaskin, who was the writer of this movie, a lot of that, the problem with Mark Patton, I'm sure it's going to go into it in the documentary with Mark Patton, a lot of his problems, Mark's, was the fact that David Chaskin never admitted that this was intentional, this homoerotic subtext was intentional.
Right.
And they were just like, well, the lead actor is gay, and that's why the movie's gay. And Mark Patton was like, what are you talking about? There's no
way.
There's a board game in my closet that says probe. I mean, obviously, obviously
it's all over the movie. It's all over the movie. There's no way that it's just because Mark Patton happened to be gay.
Mark Patton didn't write that. He didn't write that he went back to Grady's bedroom and asked if he could sleep with him. That was in the script, Grady
or
even
the
said,
coach in general.
Boy, the coach is definitely, I mean, the S&M guy. And then Grady says at one point, he has a line that's like, she's naked in the cabana and you want to sleep here with me. I mean, Mark Patton didn't write that,
Right.
But, I mean, I would love to, I can't wait to see Mark's documentary. And I think we can defend part 2 as well, and just saying that this was the first sequel, so there was no template yet. So the reason it's different than the other ones is because the other ones hadn't come yet. So this was just them saying, well, how can we continue the story of the first movie? Let's try this. It's different. And it was different. And ultimately, they decided to go with a different route and sort of drop the Jesse character altogether, which is a little bit mysterious because he's the only person you don't know. Because he's a major character. You don't know what happened to him.
You just see the school bus.
See the school bus. So does he die? Does he not die? Who knows? It's up to you to figure it out, because it's certainly not mentioned in the Dream Warriors, which is the third movie.
Correct.
They did try to bring Wes Craven back. Him and Bruce Wagner wrote a script for it, which nobody liked. So they had, when they hired the director, Chuck Russell, who went on to direct immortal classics like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Eraser, they hired also Frank Darabont to rewrite the script. The one thing I was talking to Rebecca about before we started the show is there's a lot of really early talent in these movies, both acting-wise and writing-wise and directing-wise. They got their start. Frank Darabont, for Christ's sake. A lot of people don't even realize he co-wrote Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors. But he did. Yep. And I really dig the script for Part 3, honestly. Now, I can say this. This was the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie I have a conscious memory of watching, because it just came out on VHS when I was about maybe 7 years old. And my brother brought it home. And we were in the rec room, and him and his girlfriend were watching it. And I went in there as a 7-year-old and started watching Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Warriors. Or it's not The Dream Warriors, it's just Dream Warriors. Yeah. That's the Dawkins. Dream Warriors, as Dawkins said. Dream Warriors, not gonna dream no more. Freddie had, this was another great actor that was introduced in this film, too.
Oh, yeah, Patricia Arquette. It was her first role. She played Kirsten.
And they brought Heather Langenkamp back as Nancy. Now, Heather Langenkamp was one of the first horror actors that I ever befriended. I have a special place in my heart for Heather Langenkamp, because the first convention I ever did, she was the first person I met, and was very sweet and took me as her date to the VIP party, and so I love Heather Langenkamp. But yeah, so she returns. She's just so tiny. She's such a small, petite little lady. It's great. But she returns in Dream Warriors. Another really good cast. There are a couple clunkers in there, but we're not going to go into any names.
Yeah, and I felt like it is all in the writing. They did a really good job of trying to flesh out, all the secondary characters and build a really strong story around these, the ability to take over these dreams and have unique powers. Though I will say, like, in retrospect, looking at it, it's like some of these people and their dream powers, it's like, my power is I can speak. It's like, man, I think we're going to need a little bit more to battle Freddy Krueger than that. But, really great concept. Kincaid's awesome.
One of my favorite lines in this movie is Taryn when she finds her power to be a punk rocker, and she whips out her switchblades and she says, in my dreams, I'm beautiful and bad.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's got some of the most iconic lines in general, like "Welcome to Primetime, Bitch." One.
Yeah, and that was an ad lib, I think. I think that was a Robert Englund line. He just came up with that shit because they started to let Robert ad lib a lot more, starting with part 3. It wasn't really the comedic thing yet, but he was starting to throw in some shit that wasn't in the script. Which Welcome to Primetime was a great example of that working perfectly. And there were some really inventive death scenes, and the marionette death has always stuck with me.
Yes.
That's a pretty, I mean, to combine the sleepwalker with who creates puppets with the sort of twisted Freddy rip your veins out and use you as a marionette scenario. I mean, that's a pretty ingenious idea. But again, we're working with a good director and a great writer and some great actors. Craig Wasson was in it, who from the De Palma film, Body Double, right? Yeah.
Yep. And he's one of my favorite characters in the movie. He just has like a really genuine quality to him. He's just so likable.
Yeah, he does. And he really is a good it's a shame we don't see more of him. He's one of those underrated actors.
That's true.
Neil Gordon was his name, the character he played.
Yeah, Neil Gordon.
And he dragged Johnny Saxon out to the
I was about to say, man, like one of the parts that definitely doesn't hold up is when those bones decide to come to life and they have to fight the bones. They should have just turned that into Freddy and let Robert Englund do it, because it's like watching that scene last night. I was just like, oh god, it's pretty rough.
Yeah, that was some good old classic stop motion that Harryhausen sort of shit going on in that scene. That was definitely pre CGI. Nowadays they just paint that shit in and like have it done in 15 minutes.
Yeah, his victory celebration at the end where he just goes like this, his arms go up twice and then he just falls back to bones and
you hear Robert Englund go, "Rah!"
It's really like it turns into a Nintendo game or something for a minute.
Like you could see that. You could see the Nintendo version of that scene. John Saxon did not like the scene. I saw an interview where he was talking about he didn't really like that. His death scene, which would be the bones, because the bones pick him up at one point and toss him across and he gets impaled by a fender or something. Yeah. It's always sad to see John Saxon die.
I tell you, man, not to be too hard on that scene, because really that's what makes this series special, is that they were trying new things and they were being inventive with what these dream powers can be and what Freddy's, powers can be even outside the dream world. So, they took some chances with things in all the films that maybe don't hold up so well, but that was really the point of the whole series, was like, what can we do creatively to bring these nightmares alive? So
another cool one though, that reminds me, the Taryn death with a drug, that one always pops because the little needle marks in her arm become mouths looking for the needles to come in. And I think her head was originally supposed to blow up in that scene, but they couldn't get the head to blow up. Freddy gets her.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying Freddy gets her with those finger, his claw turns to finger needles in his other hand too, I think. And it's really weird, but great surrealistic shit, like really creative.
The commentary thread through all of these movies regarding like parents being really shitty is so strong. And this one, it comes back in the third one as well with, Kristen's parents or her mom. It's kind of reminds you of like Tina's mom at the beginning of the original film, how she's got this guy with her or whatever. And then just like how straightforward they are with tackling like the drug abuse in that scene and just all that kind of social commentary stuff. They're just so like straightforward with it. It's pretty brutal stuff sometimes, the way they tackle like that death's one of them. And then like how they kill Nancy by tricking her to think that like her dad's there and he's giving this heartfelt moment, and then it's just Freddy and he kills her. Like that's the star of the original movie, and they just do her so dirty like that. Like they're really brutal the way they handle a lot of things in these films, from the social commentary to just how like reckless they are with just who they kill and how they kill them.
And as much as I like some of the stuff in 4, don't you think that maybe the conclusion of this movie would have been a good way to end it?
Yeah, going into 4 and having to recast Patricia Arquette, I think really. I was just watching 4 before we started. In fact, it's been playing the last few minutes have been playing over here, and I think they got some interesting things going on in 4. But having to recast that part, I think, really sets it off on the wrong foot. It would have been
particularly with Miss Tuesday Night.
She's not a fan of Tuesday.
No,
Gotcha.
or the song, her, you know.
Yeah.
Her hit song.
She's got the theme song, and she takes over as the final girl. Final win for her.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of the reason she got cast is because Rennie Harlan had a thing for her.
Rennie Harlan, who did some other really fun 80s, early 90s films, Die Hard 2, Cliffhanger.
That's right. This was, according to some of the things I've seen, he got the job working with Bruce Willis because of this movie. Because this was the highest grossing independent film of all time when it came out. $50 million, Part 4, The Dream Master made. So
yeah, and it's still in the top 3 overall in terms of Nightmare on Elm Street series, like highest grossing Nightmare on Elm Street films.
Yeah, it made a lot of dough, and it was made without even a finished script. Again, we got another famous screenwriter, Brian Helgeland. Anyway, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, and Lisa Wilcox. She comes in as Alice and joins the cast, and is the important. Yeah.
I thought she did fine. It's just, you know, the continuity's not there.
Yeah.
She's a different character.
Well, something I think was really nice about the writing of that film, which was different than some of the other ones, was that Alice actually had a character arc.
Yeah.
Not something you see in a lot of 80s horror films. Is a character that starts one way and ends up another. Usually you start happy and you end screaming, and that's it. You know?
Right. And we're to the point now where, like a lot of the slasher franchises of the 80s, they're just churning them out. Like this is around the time Halloween 4 and 5 are both coming out back to back. I don't know exactly what the state of Friday the 13th was, but safe to say there were probably a couple of those coming out around the same time as well. But this was like, didn't they do basically 3 in a row? Like 87, 89?
Yeah, they did 86, 87, 89. And I want to say Part 2 came out in 85. I think all of them were, because so you had Part 1 in 84, Part 2 in 85, Part 3 in 86, 7, 8, 9. So yeah, you just had a Freddy a year, man. You were making some dough with that Freddy.
Yeah, which, you know, it starts to suffer because of that too. And I think anytime you kill off like the characters that you really liked from the previous entry, like they just pretty much, the first half of 4 is like, all right, we're going to kill off Joey, I believe is his name, and Kincaid and Kristen. And, you know, sorry.
Yeah. Kirsten or Kirsten, depending on which, it's 2 different names. That always got me. I was like, sometimes they call her Kirsten and sometimes they call her Kristen. And I'm like, it's 2 fucking different names. Pick one.
Yeah. 2 different actors playing the part, 2 different names.
Very confusing. But you were talking earlier about Joey's death with the waterbed. That was a good one.
It was really good.
Joey's death always, or death or potential death always includes a half-naked woman, usually completely naked.
Yeah, she's completely naked. And he falls for it every time.
That's true. Yeah, the easiest way to kill Joey is just for Freddy to turn into a woman, which he literally does in Part 3. Actually, the reverse. The woman turns into Freddy, which is disturbing because he was just making out with the woman, and it was Freddy.
What really starts to bother me about and a lot of these movies in general, just the way they handle their characters, like Kincaid and Joey are just so dismissive of the fact that Freddy could be back. It's like, come on, guys, we're talking about a guy who kills you in your dreams, and your friend has some ability to bring you into these dreams and to be able to. She's really the core of what made 3 work, and she's telling them yeah, he's coming back, and they're just like, no.
Yeah, why would he come back? We don't have.
We're past that now.
Naturally, she's completely correct. Now, there was a karate element to him.
Yeah. Well, just even going back to Kirsten, even when I was earlier about their abilities in dreams, hers is I can do some backflips. It's like, oh, cool.
Yeah, she's a gymnast as well as being able to drag you into her dreams. As if dragging you into her dreams wasn't enough, she can also compete in the Olympics.
Right.
But Rick can also compete in the Olympics. That's Alice's brother, but he can compete in the karate category because there's a lot of 80s karate action. You can imagine Ralph Macchio, must have really inspired Rick's character.
So how can we take advantage of some other pop culture stuff right now too?
And as much as he had some cool deaths in 4, Rick's death really did kind of blow because he just has a karate fight with an invisible man and then gets stabbed. From what I saw in a documentary, that had to be improvised because they run out of money to do the original scene, and so they just could he just fight nobody?
Yeah.
So
and there's a writer's strike at the same time they're making this too. So there's a couple of scenes that the writer or the actors had to just make up the lines for.
Oh, is that? Oh man, it's amazing this movie fits together as well as it does, but it actually fits together pretty good, Dream Master.
Yeah, and I think they did a pretty solid job with the new characters that they brought in and giving them a backstory, and they were likable enough. I thought they were actually really likable. And Sheila's death too, the asthma thing where he just basically sucks the life out of her, is a great visual as well.
Yeah, want to suck face?
Yeah, more iconic lines.
Alice absorbed Kirsten's power. She absorbed kind of the brains of the Sheila character. She absorbed Rick's karate demonstrations. Always done to Dramarama. There's an early scene in that movie that's one of my favorites. What about you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sight.
Yeah. He shows her how to do a kick. Switch. The pitch.
Right.
Yeah.
And the shoe goes flying. Thing.
Sight.
That's all about balance.
That's right. It's all, and then that plays into the ending too when they're fighting in that fucked up looking church.
They should have ended in Freddy's dojo.
Yeah, well, he does take one trip to Freddy's dojo where he dies, but I heard
more bad parents.
Terrible. This movie is the hallmark of these movies. Are just these horrible parents. Kristen's mother makes a reappearance. Andale.
Yeah. So it does kind of get you into the details of how they handle these people being killed in dreams, because she's killed in the dream in 3, but she's not dead. So
yeah, that's a good point. I never thought about that, but that's right, because Kirsten's mother gets her head chopped off in part 3 in a dream.
Yeah.
But it doesn't affect the living Kirsten's mother. She's still alive because she pops up in part 4. That's interesting. Yeah. So,
I guess it's really just bad continuity. I don't know that they were actually trying to hint at something deeper in terms of it wasn't her dream, but at the same time, Kristen's character basically brings all these people into her dreams, and every time someone else dies in the dream that she's brought them into, they're dead. So it's kind of weird. But that's what happens when you're making these movies year after year after year with a different creative team. And, the New Line stuff is pretty consistent, I guess, but, different directors and writers. So.
And even when the Freddy series hit its low, they were never really quite as low as some of the others, in my humble opinion. You had some Friday the 13th in there that were real stinkers,
Yeah.
And some of the Freddy movies were like not as good as the others, but they seem to have a quality, a bar that was a little bit above some of the Friday the 13th. Now I'm like, my manager is just going to kill me for saying that because she loves everything about Friday the 13th. But this, as I say, is just my humble opinion. I think the quality, even when it dipped, was still fairly good.
Right.
Especially in the face of them not having finished scripts and things.
Yeah, I think it goes back to just the nature of the projects with the kind of imaginative dream world that they're creating. Like they always did deliver in that element, even when it started to get more into just like really cheesy, hokey comedian Freddy stuff, which really starts to take off.
Yeah.
From this point on.
Yeah.
For the next two, at least.
Yeah, well, I think that would be a good segue into that fifth one.
Yeah.
Right,
Dream.
which I didn't get to watching it, and I remember the only thing I remember about it is that Freddy's trying to have a baby, and like the dinner table scene where they're like all stuffed with food and stuff. Otherwise, I couldn't tell you a damn thing about what happens in that one.
Which that was an idea of Sarah Risher, am I saying that correctly? Who was the producer. And yeah, she was the one that suggested that Freddy has a baby with Alice.
Which is because she had a kid that was so horrible.
Yeah.
She was like, this is a nightmare.
If my child could be Freddy's child.
And
That's
somewhere the writer of Halloween 6 was like, interesting.
And Stephen Hopkins, great director. I mean, Stephen Hopkins is a great visualist. He was hired to do it. I think he might be Australian. You know, I think of Ghosts in the Darkness and that movie Judgment Night with Emilio Estevez.
Yeah.
He had a very unique visual style, but he brought it first to Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. But, you know, and he was trying to do it as a darker thing. He wanted to go back to darker, but
It wasn't going to be, Freddy and a little baby. 3 men and a baby.
yeah,
Freddy and a baby.
that's right. Yeah, he didn't want to go. He tried not to go the sillier route, but I don't know if the movie overall worked. I heard he was a great artist. He storyboarded like the whole thing, but again, you didn't have a finished script. You just had this Sarah Risher idea of, let's have an evil Freddy baby in it somewhere.
Right.
I know that it was heavily butchered by the MPAA.
Yeah, it was heavily
It makes
censored.
sense.
And every single sequence in that, I think, was cut back. But because they were trying to get these out in like 1 year periods, they didn't really have the time to fight the ratings because you had to get it in the theater.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, the director just kind of had to shrug and say, okay, I guess we'll take what we can get. But some of those elongated sequences, I don't know if you've seen any of them, Jay, of like Greta's death and the guy that turns into the motorcycle as he's driving it are really cool. The effects are kind of awesome to watch, but you can't see any of that in the final movie because they cut it all out pretty much.
Everything that you just said is revealing just how little I remember about 5, truly. Like, I need to see it again because all the stuff you're talking about, I'm like, what? I need you guys to just spend 2 minutes telling me what really happens in 5. How does it end? I can't remember how it ends or anything.
Well, the basic idea of it is that Freddy is that Alice gets pregnant with Dan's babies, and baby, not twins. And while she's preggers, Freddy decides to come back and somehow put himself into the baby. Like, I guess maybe he's wanting to be reborn as Alice's baby, but he has to turn the baby into himself. So he does so by killing her friends and feeding her friends' souls to the baby, whose name is Jacob. And the movie ends with Alice and Jacob in the dream facing off against Freddy, and then Jacob vomits these souls out. And they hit Freddy in the chest and they kind of rip through him and turn him into a baby again. Freddy. And then his mother shows up, the woman, the nun who was raped by 1,000 maniacs, which I think is an overestimation.
Dan Martin.
Yeah. She picks up the baby and tries to keep Freddy from escaping, and then at the end the doors are. It's kind of cool shot where the doors are slamming and he's blowing them apart, and it slams and it blows it apart.
Is Nan Martin playing that part in this one? Because it's implied that that's the vision that what's his name keeps seeing in the third one, the nun at the cemetery and stuff like that. But I can't remember.
It's a different actress in part 5.
That makes sense. Because it's probably like a younger version.
It is. She's a younger actress in part 5, playing Amanda Kruger, I think was the mother's name.
Yep, Amanda. So this is, would have been the perfect time for them to shore up Mark Patton's part 2 storyline. He could have come in and been like, I know what's going on here. Freddy tried to use my body too, the same way he's using your baby.
Well, you couldn't have made it any worse. You couldn't have made part 5 any worse by sticking Jesse in there. I think that's actually a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
Now, the part 5 was a hit, but it wasn't like the blockbuster of part 4 or anything. I mean, it started to show the cracks in the 1 year movie a year schedule of Nightmare, and
totally.
I don't think it was a huge coincidence that they took a long break.
Yeah.
Because they did before they came out with the next one, which was Freddy's Dead.
Yeah, and Peter Jackson wrote the first draft of the script that wasn't used.
Did you ever hear? Did you ever hear what the story of that was, Jay? The Peter Jackson version?
I did not.
I'm going to tell you the Peter Jackson version. I think I'd love to get your reaction to this. So it's totally different from the final Freddy's Dead. Peter Jackson had this idea.
I would hope so.
Yeah. Peter Jackson had this idea that that Freddy had become a joke, and nobody was afraid of him anymore. It was like his reaction to what the films had become.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this idea that the kids of Elm Street now went to sleep on purpose so that they could get together, gang up on Freddy, and beat the shit out of him and humiliate him every single night because he was just such a joke. And so that was the basic premise. And then something happens and Freddy becomes powerful again by becoming darker again. And then he goes on a rampage and exacts revenge against these teenagers that had been beating him up in all these dreams. So that was Peter Jackson's version.
Yeah, so it seems like I have heard that somewhere along the line. It sounds familiar. I definitely like it better because what we get instead is basically just picking up right where it left off in terms of like the pokiness of Freddy, like, riding around, I'll get you, my sweetie type thing. And it's just like, I watched this one probably more than any of them when I was a kid, though. I will say that.
I think the reason I probably did
remember a lot of it.
The reason I did as well is because this is probably the first one I remember going as a younger boy to a movie theater and seeing Freddy's Dead above the door and going, oh, what's playing in there? And I remember them having the 3D glasses because the last like 15 minutes of this movie's in 3D. Only the last 15 minutes of it, though. And I remember reading about there was some confusion when it first came out of people going, well, when do I put the glasses on? It's like dumb shit. You put it on when it gets blurry. I mean, it's not that difficult. You were supposed to put them on when Maggie, the character, puts them on, the lead character. You want to talk about Maggie?
Well,
she was played by
Billy Zane's sister.
Oh yeah, Lisa Zane.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she was. So she plays Freddy's daughter.
Yeah.
Quite the twist they gave us there. With we're thinking it's what I don't know his character's name or who played him at this point, but the whole movie's trying to tell us it's this guy that's Freddy's kid or somehow connected to Freddy, and they pulled a fast one on us, man.
Which makes you think that it's Jacob from part 4.
Yeah, see, I couldn't remember if there was any connection, and I remember so little about part 5. I guess I don't have any.
There's not a connection.
Idea.
There's not a connection between 5 and Freddy's Dead. I think maybe in the early script stage there was that the character John Doe in Freddy's Dead was supposed to be Jacob, but I think they just kind of dropped that. So he's just some kid with amnesia. Oh, I should say that instead of Peter Jackson, what they got was Mike DeLuca. Rachel Talalay, who was the director who produced the other ones, went on to do classics like Tank Girl. she came up with the story, and then Mike DeLuca, who was head of development at New Line, actually wrote the final script for Freddy's Dead. So you can blame them.
But I will say that's really the beauty of New Line, that, Rachel Talalay was able to be a part of it for so many years and then work her way up to directing one. That was kind of like their MO, like, let's get new people in here for everyone, and you kind of could work your way up through the ladder at New Line. So that's cool. I still think it's a fun movie.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it has some of the other deaths at the ends of the other movies might have been better endings for Freddy than the one in this, where essentially he's just blown up with a pipe bomb. It's not a wonderful final death. Because he's dragged out of the nightmare, which has already happened before and didn't work. So I don't know why it would work this time. And then he's blown up with a pipe bomb. Could have come up with a better conclusion. But
now remind me if I'm missing something here, because I didn't get to finish my rewatch of 4, and then I don't remember shit about 5, as I've said. But it seemed like burying those bones worked pretty well in 3, and then in 4 they're like uncovered in a dream. And he's back again, but is that ever brought up again? Like, damn, we got to find those bones and get them buried again.
They just completely drop it. Yeah, because the dog, whose name is Jason, pisses fire. And
I love that dude.
I could just imagine Rennie Harlan sitting there going, how are we bringing Freddy back? And Rennie goes, well, we're going to piss fire. Dog pisses fire.
Dog named Jason.
Yeah, dog named Jason. Yeah, it sounds Russian instead of Finnish now. Dog named Jason.
I've heard that some of those rewrites that the actors had to do themselves, mainly because his, at that time, I guess, English was not that great. So they were just like, we'll handle it, like, how does this sound? And he's like, okay, sure.
Well, there's a little bit of a controversial story about, the actress that plays Sheila. Apparently, and we're going back to part 4 now. When we get done with part 4, I promise you we're going to skip over the rest of Freddy's Dead, because I think we've said enough about that.
Yeah.
But
the best thing about Freddy's Dead is that it submits the series into, like, basically it's buried, and then we get what I consider my favorite film out of all of them, which is New Nightmare.
That's right. And maybe we should just jump straight into New Nightmare, because I could leave off the Sheila story, because it could be a little incendiary anyway. So
is
anyway.
It like a Me Too story? It seems like I've seen it's mentioned in the documentaries where he's just like really kind of like, it's not really a Me Too story, but he's just like forceful and like the way he talks to her about certain things. Or
well, apparently Rennie Harlan told the girl who played Sheila that she didn't know how to play a black girl, and she's a black girl. She's African American. So what if white Finnish guy knows about
that's not good.
He apparently apologized later, but I don't think she was very pleased with that, because why would you be?
Yeah.
Right.
It would be like a straight guy saying, hey, to a gay actor, hey, you can't play gay.
Yeah. There's really no coming back from that.
But I'll tell you where we are going to go, and we're going to go there right now.
Yay.
Let's do it. New Nightmare.
Wes Craven's New Nightmare, the first Freddy film that I actually saw in theaters in 1994. They got Wes to come back because Bob Shaye promised to give him a cut of all the sequels. So there was a lot of contention about Wes Craven not receiving any money for anything but the first film. He had no right to any of the sequels, and he thought that was not a fair deal since he created the character that built New Line Cinema. So Bob Shaye and him eventually worked out a deal where Wes would retroactively get cuts of all of the sequels and the merchandising of Freddy, being the creator. And Wes at that point was like, oh, okay. And that made him amiable about coming back to maybe doing another Freddy. Now, Wes said he watched all these movies in the series and couldn't figure out any sort of a story that would continue from that. So his solution was to set the movie in the real world with the real actors playing themselves and have Freddy be not a child killer, but a force of nature trying to escape from the films, a force of evil. He doesn't even look like he's burned in this movie. He has a completely different look where it's almost like his skin is torn away. Really, Really, and what do you think of that new? He has a new glove too. He has a knife on his thumb this time. What do you think of that look, Jay, in the new one? Because it's a different kind of Freddy. It's a big, beefy Freddy.
I like the look. I like everything about the idea. Really, I think Wes was on the right track in terms of trying to reinvent it and bring it into the real world. And I'm a really big Scream fan, so like what this is 94, Scream's 96. It's just, it kind of shows you where he's at in his thought process, which is also weird though that he then turned Scream down for a long time because he thought it was too violent. Because it seems like when he got that script, he would have been like, this is the perfect continuation from what I just did with New Nightmare in 94. Because it just makes so much sense, like the postmodern aspects of it.
Yeah, and this is considered the first postmodern horror film of the 90s.
Of the 90s, which was a decade, the latter part, full of this sort of postmodern self-referential thing because of Scream and Kevin Williamson and guys like that made it kind of cool. But really, like you were saying too, it was this was the first one, and it's kind of ironic that Wes wrote and directed this one and then directed the next one, which really blew up that sort of thing. Because I remember before this movie, and also before Scream, bringing that into it as well, whenever you had a movie within a movie, there was always some bullshit title that you knew would never be, real.
Yeah.
But, with Scream, they were mentioning movies that we had all seen and directors we don't, and I had never seen anything like that. Like, you're talking about real shit, not like bullshit made up movie within movie shit.
Right.
And New Nightmare had that sense because John Saxon is John Saxon. Yeah. Heather is Heather. And Heather actually, that Wes Craven asked her permission to do this because she had a stalker in the 80s. She had to move to London, believe it or not.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah. And so he asked her permission, which was good. And then he worked into the script that, the stalker aspect, which in the script, the stalker is actually Freddy. But in real life, it was just a crazy fan who apparently was unhappy that they killed Nancy off in the series, but crazy people everywhere.
You're right.
Did you ever hear, Jay, about the original version of how Wes Craven was going to portray himself in New Nightmare?
I don't think so.
It's kind of interesting. He chose to go more on, with what he did, the sophisticated guy up in the Hollywood Hills, but originally he said that his character, Wes Craven, was going to be driven around Hollywood in a van by Michael Berryman from The Hills Have Eyes, and that Michael Berryman was going to go to Heather Langenkamp and with this weird looking van, and he was going to open the back of it, and in the back of it you would see Wes Craven leaned over a typewriter trying to type the script because, typing the script is what keeps him alive because Freddy is trying to come back. And he was supposed to have his eyelids cut off because he was afraid to sleep. And so he was going to be like a fucked up version of Wes Craven.
Yeah. I love the Michael Berryman aspect of it. And I really don't think I think it could have worked that way. It would have been definitely very entertaining.
Wouldn't mind see Michael Berryman in the flick. That would have been a good way to get him in there in such a way that I guess it makes some sort of sense.
Yeah, totally. As long as he's Michael Berryman. It's just like, I'm buddies with Wes Craven. Doesn't that make sense to you guys? It should.
Makes sense to me. Yeah.
Right, there you go. So, wow.
Yeah, so that was the original idea. A lot of this movie had to do. They also continued on the earthquake theme from the first.
Yeah, because there was actually an earthquake during the shooting of the film, the Northridge quake. So they used footage of real earthquake damage.
Can't buy that kind of footage.
No. I'm sure New Line was like, we're saving.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And I'm sure that they really enjoyed the concept of this too because like everybody's in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you even had like Nick Corey. You had that like Tuesday night was at the funeral and Nick Corey, and I think that was the scene Wes Craven was gonna invite Johnny Depp to be in, but decided not to because he didn't want to get turned down. And come to find out, Johnny Depp would have said, "Yeah, I would love to have gone out and been in the scene." So, oh well, what might have been.
It would have been if that's all it was. It would have been cool, but at the same time, it's not like that big of a deal that he's not there either.
That's true. And you had little Miko Hughes from Pet Cemetery. One of my favorite stories is one Wes Craven told about how Miko Hughes' parents would get him to cry. They're like, we don't. If you need him to cry, we can do that for you, but we don't like to do it too often. And Wes was like, well, in this scene, it might be nice for him to cry. And so the dad asked the mother to leave the room. And after a few minutes, he brought Miko Hughes over. And the dad was like, I have to tell you something, Miko, your mother is dead. And Wes Craven was like, oh my God, what just happened? And the kids started crying. And apparently that was the secret trick the parents would use.
Oh man, I mean, yeah, that makes total sense.
I guess he was really relieved every time when Mom came back. Maybe a little much. I always wanted to just talk to Miko Hughes and be like, "Are you okay?"
Are you
Yeah.
in therapy now?
Yeah, but hey, Miko got to keep that playground thing that he climbed up on, the big space shuttle thing. He has that.
That's really insane.
They were just going to throw it out. Miko was like, "No, we live in the desert. Plenty of room out there," so they took it out there, and I think he still has it to this day.
Little Miko was like, Wes Craven, you got to give me that. You had my dad tell me that my mom died to make it to this movie. You owe me.
And Wes Craven is like, what else can I give you? I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Here,
I will say that like this run for Wes really is what I think cemented him as, how we look at Wes Craven now in retrospect. Like he didn't come back and do this and then Scream never happened. His legacy he would still have a legacy, but man, this really, and it's weird too, because, usually at this point in people's careers, like John Carpenter didn't necessarily, his hits were earlier on, in his career. Like Wes really cemented himself as like one of the greats in the 90s with these two films.
That's true, yeah.
After his initial heyday, and
and I the thing that for me that really I thought was tragic about Wes when he died was he was such a brilliant man. If you ever see interviews, and I'm sure most people watching this have seen interviews of Wes Craven, he was always about the depth of his stories. No matter what they were, there was always some sort of a metaphor. You could tell he was a college professor, a mythology. Yeah, he didn't just want to make movies about people that got ripped apart.
Right.
He wanted to make movies that had a sense of depth through them. And I sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes you got things like The Hills Have Eyes Part 2, or Deadly Friend. But, he was also a director and he had to eat. And so he sometimes would obviously just take jobs.
Right.
But I think that his highs kind of overshadowed the lows. And
totally.
To me, it was always a bit tragic that Wes died from brain cancer because, you have someone that intelligent and just to have them slip away like that seems a little bit of like, there's I don't know about the dignity of something like that, to have someone so brilliant lose their facilities in that way. But he definitely left behind a great legacy of films. So, yeah, I would definitely dedicate this episode to Wes Craven.
Absolutely.
And if you ever want to talk about Scream, man, we were talking about that a little bit. We could dive into that. I'd love to have a Scream show.
I would be all for that. It's my favorite franchises.
Because we'll save that for another day. But today, I think we've pretty much run out of time with the Nightmare on Elm Street chat. It just flew by, but we had a lot of films to cover. Rebecca, I want to thank you for being a part of it. Mm-hmm. And Jay, thanks for coming back on the show, man.
Anytime, man. I had a good time. And like you said, dedicating it to Wes is the thing to do. I mean, he definitely, between the original Nightmare, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and Scream, like the impact he had on me is tremendous just with those films. Yeah,
I agree completely. So on that note, I think we're going to close out for this week. Guys, thanks so much for watching. And until I see you next week, take care of yourselves.
Goodbye.